Going to be talking about institutions developing in a globalized world, which is 9.8. And we are going to be focusing our attention today on the United Nations and the role of the state. So here is our objective from the College Board. It says, explain how and why globalization changed international interaction between states. So this is really where we're going to be focusing our attention today. So yes, the United Nations is going to be our case study for that. I'm not going to talk about how the United Nations works or the different branches because that's what your reading is about. So there's really no point in me talking about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about that second aspect, right? How it changed international interaction between states. So just a little bit of intro. After World War II, right, the United Nations is a new international organization that replaces the defunct League of Nations. And it, along with other international organizations, were formed with the kind of stated intention of maintaining world peace and facilitating international cooperation. You can imagine that after two completely and utterly destructive world wars in a 30-year period, people were like, maybe we should, cooperate. Um, so it now contains 193 peace-loving nations. That's a quote. And it performs services such as disaster relief, counterterrorism, and nuclear non-proliferation. So nuclear non-proliferation is to try not to spread nuclear weapons. So all member states contribute to its budget. So this, along with the how it forms like help with disaster relief and counterterrorism and nuclear nonproliferation. These are all ways that states kind of come together in order to support the United Nations and therefore support other states. So rather than thinking of other states as competition, they are able to consider them as uh, as more cooperative in nature. So the United Nations cannot make laws. However, because it does consist of 193 nations, its decisions generally reflect the prevailing world values. Committees within the United Nations are able to negotiate multilateral agreements that are able to give teeth to its pronouncements and its policies, and then those go to form bodies of international law. How it alters the relationship between states. So something that I really want to explore is this idea of, let's see if it lets me, state sanctity. So if we think of sanctity as like holiness, leading up to World War II, the state and the nation state is really kind of seen as the ultimate expression of human political ideas. And as time has gone by since 1945, it seems almost as though the state, this is what I was worried about, this state has become, there's been a decrease in how, this is a vocab word, and I'm going to spell it wrong, sacrosanct or holy. Wow. How holy the idea of the state is. Um, So, what has led to that, this decrease in the sacrosanct nature of the state, is really globalization, right? So, with the increase in technology and communication, with the ability of multinational corporations to exist, with the fact that I can go on Alibaba and I can buy stuff from China and have it shipped, like I don't need an American intermediary at all to do these things, or I can go on Etsy and I can buy, like Mr. Oliva bought me these adorable little blown glass pugs from the Czech Republic and through Etsy had them shipped to me for my birthday. So like, why does the state exist? Why do we need small independent nation states? And especially starting in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we saw the decreasing importance, what seemed to be the decreasing importance of the state structure. A lot of that had to do with this idea of human rights, especially how human rights can, which is one of the proclaimed aims of the United Nations, is to spread this value of human rights. So what happens when the state, we'll take Syria as an example, when the state itself is in violation of those worldwide principles of human rights. Who who wins? Do we value the sanctity, the holiness, the independence of the state if that's how it's trying to project its power over its people? Or do we value the internationalist human rights agenda? Right? We also have the idea of failed states. So if you are Libya post 2013, where like, yeah, there's a government, but there are also like three other competing governments, and none of them have authority or control over the entire territory, what is the point of a state? Or Somalia, where basically it's being run by criminal organizations. What's the point of a state? Right? So these are questions that we have to ask, and the United Nations and things like the European Union have really called into question whether or not a world state is kind of the end goal, like you see in those future movies um, where we're traveling space and Earth is ruled by one big or united organization. Is that the future? And I really used to think that, and other scholars used to think so too. But in the last, gosh, 5 years, we've seen this growth and this resurgence in nationalism, right? I think of during the presidential campaign in 2016, one of now president's famous lines is either we have a country or we don't, when he's talking about border security and building a border wall. And so this really calls into question, we're probably not very close to a world state. We're probably not very close to representatives from what we would think of as countries going to the United Nations, and the United Nations being our overarching governing body. That's gotten farther away with things like Brexit and the nationalist agenda of President Trump. So, will there be a world state, right? Probably not. Not in any of our lifetimes. But the interaction between states that has led to that, where coalitions are the norm rather than the exception, was really ushered into place by globalization, and I think by the world altering trauma of World War II.